Hey everyone, it's Colin with Legalized Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. Today I'm going to be demonstrating a couple different basing schemes, and we're going to be using these bases that were made with the techniques in the simple base construction video. So go back and check that out if you want to see how these bases were made. A 40 millimeter base and a 32 millimeter base. So today we're going to be painting these the same, but then we're going to introduce some weathering powders to show how those can dramatically affect the final basing scheme. Adds a little grit, adds a little realism, but by painting both these bases exactly the same and just using different powders, you really show the diversity of introducing weathering powders into your basing repertoire. So they're pretty straightforward to use, and I'm really looking forward to that. First things first, we're going to paint these the same. We're going for kind of a blasted wasteland scheme, which is going to be kind of gray, violet, black, and that's going to be the 40 millimeter base. And then the 32 millimeter base, we're going to do more of a Martian Wasteland, Scorched Martian Wasteland type deal. So we're going to be using some red powder, some rust powder. So that's going to be really cool. Dramatically different final product, but everything up into the weathering powders is going to be exactly the same. So first things first, prime black. And then I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Air Dark Gray Blue for the base coat. And basing is something that I love, that I really spend a lot of time working on, spend a lot of time thinking about. This kind of basing I used for my Zinch army, for my Chaos army, really. Mortarian, Magnus, Bloodthirsters. One of the reasons I used the Scorched kind of black, gray, violet basing, and one of the reasons I did that was because the models themselves are so vibrant. I did like magenta and blue and red, that having a kind of toned down basing scheme, a dark basing scheme, really helped those models pop, but it also didn't overwhelm the viewer. Like if I had done a really vibrant basing scheme, it would have just been way too much. So this is nice for like really, really vibrant armies where you want to keep that, you want to keep the focus on the model. This is a great basing scheme to use. So next up, we're going to paint the rocks. And we're going to use Vallejo Model Color Field Blue. This is a very bluish gray. So it says Field Blue. It's not a true blue. It's definitely more of the gray. And we're actually done with the airbrush. We're actually done with the airbrush. So that was about it. And then we're going to do some a little painting, a little washing, and then the powders and some dry brushing, and then the powder. But we just want to go in and just pick out the rocks. Doesn't have to be super precise up and down every side. The other thing about weathering powders is they are going to cover and influence everything else on the base. Of course, we have control over how much it does, but it does give us some leeway on the basing where we don't have to get every detail perfect, because weathering powders are going to come in and kind of muddy the waters around everything, as natural dirt or sediment or ash would do. It'll sit on top of the rocks, it'll get on the side of the rocks. So it's a natural occurrence, but what it does is it does free us up, that we don't have to be too fine with the painting, every detail and everything on the base and making it look, really finished. While we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to base coat this skull here, which just so happens to be a Tau skull. Totally random, totally a coincidence. Most of these bases have Tau skulls. So we're using German Camo Beige, World War II, from Vallejo Model Color. And we're doing this because we're not going for like a bleached white skull. We want that kind of old skull, very kind of desaturated, more brown than, white or ivory. And see, we got some on the black part of the base. Not worried about that at all. So we're going to do that, and then it looks like that field blue is dry. This is the fun part. We're going to take some of this Army Painter purple tone, and this just gives a little bit of color into the base, a little bit of interest, and really stone is fun to do because you can paint stone however you want. So we're going to coat these in this Army Painter purple tone, and then we're going to take our finger and wipe it off before it dries. And that's going to leave the purple tone just in the recesses, just in the cracks, just like that. So you can see we just wiped it right off the top and we left it there. So it does tint the stone and it kind of gives a hint of that purple, but it doesn't, we're not leaving it there to just make purple rocks. It's just influencing the color of the rock. I don't know how well, there you go. You can see that a little bit. So you put these side by side, you can see that kind of purple tone. It is subtle. It's especially subtle on, rocks this small. So then we're going to, I should have waited to base coat the skull until after I did the dry brushing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take AP Strong Tone, Army Painter Strong Tone, which if you don't have, go out and buy right now because this stuff is amazing. I love this stuff. It's like a brownish, blackish. So, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to wash with the Strong Tone, wipe it off. A little less, we're not pressing real hard here, but this is just to give another tone to the stone, just to give more kind of color, more definition. It's darker than the purple, so it's gonna sit in those recesses a little more, but it's just going to give us just a little more variation. And that is, the stones are defined. Okay, cool. And that's it for the stone. This is so easy. I can't even explain. I can't wait to show you just how easy these bases are to do. It's going to blow your mind. So now we're going to go in. Oh, come on. Pro tip, when something is resisting, don't squeeze harder. We've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. But it bears repeating that if a dropper bottle isn't, so I just have these like little dental tools and stuff. If a dropper bottle isn't dispensing paint, don't just squeeze it harder. So a couple drops of this, and this is Vallejo Model Color Pale Blue. And really, these colors aren't, 100% necessary for this basing. You could use a rust blue or Fenrisian blue or something like a blue gray and get very similar effect. You could use a Drucci Violet and Agrax Earthshade on the rocks and get something very similar. So the colors themselves. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dry brush. And a rock popped off. That's okay. We're going to dry brush the whole base, rocks and everything. Oops, another rock fell off. Oh my goodness. That's not ideal, but we're just going to soldier on. We're not going to worry about that. Some of these bigger rocks, I think I just dispensed it though. So if it happens on the next base, I'll show you. You can just grab some super glue. If it's a bigger rock, you can grab some super glue, put a dot right there, and just put the rock back, and it'll stick right on there. The reason I should have waited to base coat the skull is because of this dry brushing, this overall dry brushing. So this dry brushing is going to highlight the nice thing about using the blue-gray for the base and the blue-gray for the rock is this. No, is it the rock from the other base? I think so. Yeah. How'd that get over there? Not to worry. So you just take a little bit of super glue, take the rock, put it back, and we're ready to rock and roll. Man, the puns tonight are just on fire. So, quick dry brush. Doesn't have to be real heavy. We're just picking out the high spots. And literally, this base is ready for pigments. We might throw a tuft on there. Maybe I'll throw a tuft on there to make it a little more interesting. But that base is ready for pigments. That's how fast this is. This one, there's not a whole lot of gray on there, so we're just going to keep soldiering on with the bone. So then we're going to give it a wash with that Army Painter Strong Tone over the German Camo Beige, and this is going to be a heavy wash. This is not just a light glaze. This we want to establish all those recesses on the skull. Make sure that we get that little indent in the forehead and everything else. And while that dries, I'm going to go ahead and grab a tuft, couple tufts, excuse me, a couple tufts out of my embarrassingly large collection of tufts. So I really like, I have two of those. I really, really like this company. I think they're phenomenal. The company is called Mini Nature. Whoa, there it is. Mini Nature. These are tufts of desert. But one of the things that I really like about Mini Nature is you can see how irregular the sizes of these tufts are, and the shape of these tufts is very irregular. Some of their packages of tufts are even more densely packed. So this is really, but you can see there are little tiny ones, there are big patches of tuft here. And like I've talked about many times, the more kind of variation, the more not uniform you can get when trying to replicate a natural element, the more natural it's going to look. Versus tufts like these are like bushes, but versus tufts like these where they're pretty much all the same size, they're all pretty much circular. And so these have their uses for like little shrubs, little like tufts, like maybe one tuft of grass on a base or something, but they're not as versatile as these. The reason I like these and the reason these are harder to find is it's harder to make tufts like this than it is to just put like dots of glue and then put, the material on the dots. Because when you put the dots on the sheet, they're circular, obviously. So the Mini Nature tufts are harder to make, but they do have a more natural look, and I just love these things. Mini Nature are my go-to. I have a bunch of them, and they add a really nice little element to a base. And when we're doing when we're doing pigments, we want to add the tuft before we do any pigment. Pigment work is going to be the last thing that we do because we want the pigments to integrate that tuft into the base as well. If we were actually putting models on these bases, we would put the models on the bases first, depending on the model, but 99 times out of 100, unless you're doing like cast evens. But or even then. Because you want the, excuse my arm, you want the pigments to integrate the model into the base. And I'll be doing plenty of tutorials on that. Don't worry about that. So before we do pigments, and while we're waiting for that, looks like that wash is dry, but we're just going to plow ahead with the tufts. So we take, I use these little angled tweezers. They're very sharp. I don't know where I got these, but I'm sure you can find them on Amazon. They're just little angle nose modeling tweezers. I put a little bit of glue at the end of the packet here. Just put it on, you can put it on a spare base or a spare, it's probably not the best place to put it, but. So when you pull these off, you can see this one's a little circular, and these are desert tufts. I like these for this kind of wasteland look. So you've got kind of this hole here in the middle of this base. And so I'm going to put a tuft there just to kind of fill that out because it was distracting. So put a tuft there. Now we've got a little bit of grass in there. Now I want to find a little bit smaller tuft, maybe like this one. You see that one's a little bit smaller. We just dab the tuft in glue a little bit. And then we're going to come over here and we're just going to cover up that little divot with that tuft. And maybe one more. Since we're not putting a model on here, maybe we'll do one more little one that's not so sunken in. Maybe we can put it out here kind of by the skull. That looks nice. So if we were doing a model, we would put the model on first and then put the tufts. That way, because we don't know for certain where the feet are going to hit, and we don't necessarily want a foot to have to land on top of a tuft or something. It could look unnatural. So here we're just going to put one nice sized tuft on the back. Yeah, we'll just put one nice sized tuft on the back there. And that's it. So little tuft work. It's tuft work, but someone has to do it. Just on fire. So now that wash is dried on the skull, we're going to go and use some Vallejo Model Color Deck Tan. This is a very desaturated, like khaki-ish color. It's somewhere between ivory and true like khaki, but it gives a very soft, it's a very soft bone color. So we want to make sure this is thin. We're not, that's probably a little thick. We're not trying to highlight this all in one go. So you can see there, whoops, you can't see anything because this light is just too bright. There we go. So you can see there, that is pretty thin. That's good. So we're going to come here and again, just picking out, making sure that we're leaving, we're going to pick out the eye sockets, the orbits, but we're going to leave that divot. We want to make sure to give that skull definition. And we are using one of our busted up kind of flattened, you can see there the brush tip, kind of flattened, busted up kind of texture brushes, because these skulls aren't smooth, bone is not smooth. So if we have a little bit of texture on the edges of the highlights, that's a good thing. We want that. So get the orbits and make sure we leave some definition there. And you can see that is more of a subdued kind of bone color. Then we can come back with just a little bit of this model color ivory. And we're really just going to hit the orbit of the brow in here and back a little bit on the head, and maybe a little bit here because it's facing up basically, and a little bit of this ridge in the middle there. And we have a nice little bone, nice dead forgotten Tau, which, I mean, really, who doesn't? Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do, there we go. So you can see, let me focus in on this a little bit more. There we go. So you can see there, nice bone, rocks look interesting, but not jumping out of the base. They have a little bit of purple to them, a little bit of color to them, but they're not going crazy. So that's what we want. And now comes the fun part. So first things first is the disclaimer, which is these pigments are ridiculously messy and they will ruin everything they touch. Clothes, carpets, absolutely everything they touch, they will destroy. So you want to be extremely, extremely careful with these. So what I do, I use a box from, from models that you get, or I use the lid for the container that I keep all my pigments in. So I keep my pigments, excuse me. I keep all my pigments in one of these tubs. You can get them at, I think I got them at a Container Store. These are shoe tubs. I think this is $1.15. So I keep all my pigments together in this tub. Believe it or not, this is kind of organized. This is like the least organized thing that I own. And in it, I have my pigments, my pigment fixer. I have the brushes that I use for pigments. They're all in this one box. Everything that is pigment related stays in this box. And I'm also going to get my gloves. Because, I mean, I'm serious about this stuff. This stuff is awful. It's literally just rather than paint pigment. It's paint, but without the medium to carry it. So it'll like if you spill it on the carpet, like I did at my in-laws' house, it will dye the carpet threads. So, I mean, it's not something you vacuum up or like wipe off. It will dye the carpet threads. So you've been warned. So pigments I use most commonly are Secret Weapon miniatures. They make fantastic pigments. They're a good price. One of these things will literally last you forever. I did a couple hundred, maybe 200 or 300, between 200 and 300 black kind of Wasteland bases, and I'm just now starting to run out of this black exhaust black pigment. They're really, really good. For the blasted Wasteland, we're going to be using violet, we're going to be using exhaust black, and we're going to be using slate gray. So those are the three that we'll use for the blasted Wasteland, and then for the kind of Martian blasted, terracotta earth and rust orange. And terracotta earth is like a very terracotta color. Rust orange is going to be more aggressive. It's going to be more bright. So those ones, but they make some great colors. I mean, this patina blue, you can use this for, of course, they make all the rust colors. They make, faded blue and green for doing verdigris on brass. That's just Secret Weapon. Forged Monkey made these Dago. These are really this bright. Orange and purple, just crazy. So, as far as brushes go, I use just craft brushes. I mean, because these things are going to get absolutely destroyed immediately. I do use natural hair brushes rather than synthetic. I just find it applies better. These have been worn down to the nub, and you'll see why. So you'll see just handling the pigments, or they're just getting everywhere, right? I mean, you really have to be careful with this stuff. And then to bind the pigment to the base and make sure that it doesn't fall off and go everywhere, we're going to be using Terrain Fixer or Pigment Fixer. MIG makes a pigment fixer that's pretty good, pretty darn good. Abdelung 502, also, which is AK Interactive, is Abdelung 502 pigment fixer that's really good. That's what's in, I did it in the spray bottle to do my display board for Armies on Parade. But my favorite is, surprise of all surprises, Scale 75 Soilworks Terrain Fixer. This stuff is the best, hands down. Absolutely the best. It dries hard. It keeps the color. If you just matte varnish some pigment, it's going to disappear. So this is literally the last thing you do. We're going to be using this Scale 75 pigment fixer today. And I mean, I use this giant brush for my Armies on Parade board, but since that is done, I don't need it today. So I'm going to take this box top. I'm going to lower that back down. And take this box top, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some paper towel. Literally, I mean, terrified of getting this stuff. Nice thing about this box top, oh gosh, that is really white. Hang on, sorry. There we go. That's more palatable there. A little harder to see the bases, but that's okay because the bases look a little bit better under that light. That white was really not sustainable. So, a little bit of brightness. There we go. All right. So everything we do is going to be contained. Excuse me. Everything we do is going to be contained to this top, on top of those, this box top and this lid. You just don't even want to chance it. So when I started, I would use a big box top with high sides, like a starter box top, just to really make sure that I contained everything, because this stuff is really, really, really just the worst. But it's really cool for what it can do for bases and for models. So first things first is we're going to do the 40 millimeter base. You can see that skull a little better, looking good. So the exhaust black, we're going to move the 32 off to the side. So we're going to take that exhaust black, the slate gray, and the violet pigment. And we're going to take one of these kind of busted little nub brushes, and we're just tapping. We are just tapping. That's too much. So if we get too much, we're just going to tap it with our finger. Let's zoom out a little bit here. There we go. That's better. Come on. There we go. So we are just very, very gently. We're not scooping. We're just touching the bristles to the pigment, and you can see it picked up a little bit of that pigment. We're actually going to tap that off because just what is in those, just what's in that little tiny thing will cover that much ground. So if we start scooping and mashing this stuff around, it's just gonna overwhelm the base. So the violet we're going to use is more of kind of a shadow color. So we're just going to pick a couple low spots on the base. And this is so the base just doesn't end up just black and gray and boring and awful and not interesting. So a little bit of violet is going to go a long way on this base. Then we're going to go move over to the black. And don't worry if it obscures, like it obscured that part of the base. When we come back with the pigment fixer, it's going to kind of wash that down. And that's why we did that lighter than you would necessarily be comfortable going on the dry brush. Nice thing about pigments is they're obviously just workable until you seal them. So you can come in and just start rubbing the violet and the black together to get kind of a mid, and just, you know, I put this really wherever you'd like. I mean, we don't necessarily want to apply pigment to the entire base, but we can just brush over. And this is why these brushes just absolutely disappear and just get worn down to nothing, because that's better. Oops, sorry. It's hard to go from filming on black to filming on white with all the same settings. So there, that's a little better. So why these brushes get run down is because we're brushing on this, you know, sandy mixture. And don't be afraid to run over, like we talked about when we were painting the rocks. We're going to run over those rocks while we're dry brushing. We're going to get a little bit on the skull while we're working these pigments around. And that's going to help integrate the skull into the base, right? So when we start to brush these pigments in, oops, come on, you can start to see those rocks getting integrated. Maybe a little bit more of this violet. So we're going to come up here and just hit it with a little bit of violet and just work that. And now we're going to come in with this slate gray, and this is going to be more like an ash. Make sure that we're staying over the, so this is going to be more like an ash application here. So we're going to be dabbing this slate gray, and we want it to look loose. We want it to look, so you can see there, it looks like ash. It looks like ash just fell in that spot, and that's exactly what we want. And if it go on a little heavy, like if we take a bunch of this stuff and we hit the side here and it's like piled up like that doesn't look natural at all. That just looks like a heap of something. So we can just start gently just kind of pushing it in. And now it looks a lot more natural. And the thing about Pigment Fixer is we're going to seal this, and that texture is going to stay. And that texture is really what gives you that realistic look to the pigment work and to the base. So that is the Blasted Wasteland base. And first things first, we are going to close these pigment pots. In case something catastrophic happens and these go flying, we do not want them to be open. So we're going to put this base off to the side. These are not sealed, right? So we're going to put that base off to the side. We're going to get the 32 millimeter base. And remember, this 32 millimeter base was painted the exact same way as a 40 millimeter base. And watch the magic happen. This is so cool. So this is the terracotta and then the rust orange, and you can see how strong those colors are. And this is what makes Pigment super fun. So again, over the lid, I am holding my hand on top of the box top. We're going to take some of that terracotta earth and just start. We're going to be a little bit more aggressive. I think I want to use not dark earth. No, I think I want to use rust red instead of rust orange. I think I want to take this more red than orange. Orange I think was going to be too much. So this rust red, we use the terracotta as the orange. So we're going to take this rust red and start working that in. And with pigments, just go back and forth. Take a little terracotta, a little rust red, and we're going to want that to be a little bit more terracotta than red, I think, because that red is really strong. So we're going to take that, maybe a little bit of red in here where it's just too much orange, so you want to look out for that. So red and orange, done and done. And now, so we're going to put those back in our container. And now we're going to get this terrain fixer. And how this terrain fixer works is it's basically resin. And it's a fixative. And so what we're going to do is we're going to dip our brush into the fixer and get it wet. Load up the brush. Then we're going to get our base. And we're just going to tap it. And we're going to let the fixer leave the brush. We're not pushing on the surface of the base. We're using capillary effect to draw the fixer out of the brush. So we're not, if we went through and just mashed the fixer into the pigment, it would alter the pigment. It would pick up pigment into the brush and just turn this pigment fixer red. So we just want to just give it a nice, just a gentle little tap and let the fixer wick off the brush using that capillary action. So when I did my Armies on Parade, when I rebased my entire Zinch army, which was about 140 bases, I think, I had all the bases in a tray and was doing all the pigment work and everything in, like I said, in a starter box top, and I used that spray bottle, that pump sprayer, to apply the terrain fixer to 80 bases at once. So that's an option. That saved me a ton of time. I wouldn't recommend doing it, but that was because there was nothing on the bases, So we're going to cap the terrain fixer. We're going to put that back in our container. We're going to take our brushes. We're going to put our brushes back in the container. Now the pigments here are fixed, right? They're still wet, but they're fixed. So we can put this on our work area. And now what we're going to do, this is touch pigment. This obviously, the glove obviously. And this is how careful, it's very bright. This is how careful we're going to be with cleaning up after ourselves after using this stuff. So we're going to take this and we're going to very gently fold this up, because you can see there's those pigments in there are loose. So very gently, we're going to fold this in on itself. You're going to take it in your hand. Take the glove inside out. I'm serious about this. I'm going to tie this off and seal everything pigment related into that, and then throw it. And then it's safe to throw it away. Only after all of that. Put the lid back on the fixer. And normally I would let this evaporate, but as usual, for the sake of expediency in this tutorial, I'm going to be using my heat gun. And you see how dull the base is, and how all that light gray, that beautiful ash effect that we did is pretty much gone. The red base is very subdued, but then when this pigment fixer evaporates, it all comes back. And actually the heat gun was actually a particularly bad idea, because it melted it melted this tuft a little bit. But that's okay. So here we have the blasted base, and we'll just go real quick. Thamar Black from P3. Because this really frames the final product here. And now you can handle these bases, you can pin these bases, you can game with these bases, and that pigment's not going anywhere. Right, so that pigment fixer is magic. It is so good. So we're just going to paint these base rims real quick and then have a final look at our work. And if you recognize the Blasted Wasteland base, the same base that I put the Adeptus Custodes on at the end of that tutorial, the Custodian Guard. A great basing scheme for a Custodian Guard because it's so subdued against all that bright armor and everything. So this is, two different So two completely different bases, painted the same, just using those pigments. I think the kind of Martianish base, could have probably done a little bit better, but I think that's pretty cool. It's a different look. It's definitely a unique base, with that strong red and that strong orange and the gray slate. I think it's really cool. And then the Blasted Wasteland base, I just love this base. I think it's super simple, but interesting. And Dead Tau, always a plus. But the Wasteland base in particular, I really love this scheme. So this kind of red Martian, this is going to be very specific to an army, but it works. It would be a great basing scheme. So that's just part one. In part two, we're going to do a couple more bases, and can't wait, because some of them we're going to use pigments, some of them we're not, and there's just so much versatility from this one style of base construction. There's so much versatility. So I'm looking forward to showcasing that. Thank you for putting up with all my camera maneuvering, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions about weathering pigments. Please leave them in the comments. More than happy to answer any questions. And eventually, and we're going to work up to using weathering pigments on models, on infantry, on vehicles, and how to get even more just kind of a natural atmosphere into your models. And it's a ton of fun. It's a great, great, great resource, but it is very, very intimidating to start. So hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks.